I'm supposed to talk about something that people are probably still wondering what it means, as I am. And it's about governance. And I will get to that in a second. But I'm going to try to profile what the Tijuana River watershed is in my mind, the important aspect of the Tijuana River watershed. First of all, the Tijuana River is a transboundary watershed, and in the United States, that's not a big deal. About 90% of your territory in the United States is in an international watershed. But in Mexico, it doesn't pan out the same way. In Mexico, it's probably about 10%. Within Mexico, there are more than 1,400 watersheds, and only 3 of them on the U.S.-Mexico border are international, and 3 of them in the south border. But the Tijuana River watershed, in comparison with the other 2, are it's very, very small. The 1944 treaty had several articles, and only one, Article 16, deals with the Tijuana River watershed. I'll get to that in a second. That's my map, Paul. That's all I got. And by the way, that blue spot right in the middle, that blue spot is the El Carrizo Dam. And just talking about why there's no water in Tijuana right now, this spot is bluer than El Carrizo is right now. It's really, really low. As we monitor the Colorado River Basin and Lake Mead in Tijuana, people on a daily basis are looking to see how much water there is in El Carrizo Dam. And you can see also that there's kind of a let me see if I can use a pointer here. See, there's kind of a sub-basin division, and El Carrizo is not a basin that will capture water. It's just there to regulate the flow from the Colorado River aqueduct. Anyway, the Tijuana River watershed has, in my mind, 3 features that make it unique. First of all, within the U.S.-Mexico border, the geopolitical importance of the San Diego-Tijuana region is far beyond what you'll see in other cross-border communities. And that has become very apparent in terms of social political terms when you talk about migration and other elements that begin to really weigh on how the quality of life is in Tijuana. The second feature is that being relatively small in contrast with the Colorado River and the Rio Bravo, it really makes it very manageable. It doesn't have the complications in terms of the structure of several jurisdictions as other watersheds. This is just California and Baja California, 3 municipios on the south side of the border in just San Diego County. So we should be able to manage this, yet we're stuck here 50 years after we started noticing problems, and we still can't really seem to solve them. The third one, which might be seen as bad news in the past, is probably good news now. There's an absence of water conflict. Why is there an absence of water conflict? Because there's an absence of water. And so if we don't have water, we don't fight about it. We fight about sewage, of course. But given that there is no dispute about water, we should probably be thinking along the lines of, we have common objectives here. We don't really have a zero-sum type of situation. There's also another feature which I didn't write in here. It's a biological hotspot. There are so many endemic species and species that are endangered in the coastal sage scrub that we really ought to be paying more attention about environmental management along the watershed. Now, for many years, we've been really wondering about how can we get CONAGUA to pay attention on the U.S. side in terms of governance, and how can we get U.S. members to go and be at the Consejo de Cuenca on the south side of the border. And then we start talking about now about governance. And in many ways, there's a definition of governance just very fast. It relates to the processes, the interactions and decision-making among the actors involved in a collective problem that lead to the creation, reinforcement, or reproduction of social norms and institutions. Said quickly, in another way, in the absence of a government, there's got to be some sort of governance that we really ought to be paying attention to. Hence the importance of the International Boundary and Water Commission, because the International Boundary and Water Commission is the authority in an international watershed. This is the history for all of the complications of the U.S.-Mexico border in terms of how we manage this international relationship. It's been close to 150 years, and we've only had one unilateral dispute that was not solved in terms of water. Water has been really a good news element or theme or a topic in the U.S.-Mexico border. The International Boundary and Water Commission is an international organization. It is the international organization that that comes to life when the two sections come together. Both sections are a branch of their foreign affairs agency, Department of State and Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores. And over the course of history, there have been 23 minutes that have been signed for the Tijuana River watershed. However, minutes usually in the International Boundary and Water Commission are signed to resolve issues rather than to prevent problems occurring. And over the course of history, since the 1944 treaty, there have been 23 minutes, 4 of them for sanitation, and then 15 of them for water delivery. Just extending the possibility of water being delivered to Tijuana through the Otay emergency connection. Only 4 of them are really what I would consider to be acknowledging water governance or binational water governance. In 1967, there was a channelization of the river minute. That was minute 225. In 3 years later, minute 236 started talking about construction, and there was actually an agreement that there would be 400 meters of concrete channel lining along 400 meters to the north and 400 meters to the south of the international boundary. And then from that point on, both governments, both federal governments would channelize the river. In 1977, there was a minute signed to address modifications of a U.S. portion. That minute, minute 258, actually began talking about how are we going to prevent from additional flooding happening in Tijuana if there's anything that is occurring on the U.S. side of the border. And history really played a trick on us in terms of trying to deal with the border, because in 1970, there was the National Environmental Policy Act, and then in 1972, the Clean Water Act. Suddenly, you guys in the U.S. had discovered the environmental movement, which took 15 years before it really happened in Mexico, in 1987 and 1988, when we actually began doing environmental issues on the Mexican side. Already in the U.S., it was far along in that path. And then in 2015, so what is it, like 40-something years or close to 40 years, there came minute 320. Getting back to the binational governance in the early years, the channelization of the Tijuana River, it was actually recommended that 2 governments approve the construction of maintenance for maintenance of the river. As I said, in 1970, the construction called for 400 meters on both sides of the border. But then in 1980, the U.S. federal government said, you know what, we're not gonna line the river. We're not gonna channel it. And so this is a copy of a telegram, remember those? a telegram that, that we found in the offices of the International Boundary and Water Commission in Ciudad Juarez. And since you have, I will read it because I don't think you can read it. It says, this is addressed to Governor Roberto de la Madrid, and it said, por estimarlo de interés en el proyecto de la canalización del río Tijuana, le envío los presentes documentos de parte de la División de Ingenieros del Ejército Americano, en el que informan al diputado Lionel Van Deerlen que resulta inconveniente la construcción del canal in Estados Unidos. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said, we're not going to line that. Hence, the incompatibility that we are seeing now was created in the 1970s. Hence, it began what I call a tale of frustration, lessons in cause and effect. And you see that recurrent spills of wastewater that were at some point thought to be addressed by the Border Environment Infrastructure Fund from EPA. That in the citizen corner created what is, in my mind, it articulates the frustration when you talk about the Tijuana River Valley Recovery Team. When you start saying, because the border is there, to hell with what's going on the Mexican side, we just want to stem the effects. We just want to control the effects. And that's something very hard to do. Does that mean that I'm? No, that was my bad. Okay. It means I'm bored, he says. Okay. And then the North American Development Bank obviously is another element. But in many ways, I think that the tale of frustration needs to get to the fact that, is this a tale of two rivers? What is this thing? What is the Tijuana River? Is it a river or is it a drainage channel? And I really think that San Diego and Tijuana need to look at that question up front and answer the question. Are we all okay with it being a drainage channel because it is a drainage channel? Or do we actually want a river? Because at the end of the day, having a pristine natural estuarine research reserve on the north side of the border, just downstream from a channel, a concrete channel that actually gushes everything that happens, be it storm sewer drainage, sanitary drainage, or solid waste sediment, it's just incompatible. So Minute 320 created the Binational Core Group, and it actually says that the Binational Core Group is to identify measures of cooperation. It's supposed to define the institutions and the participants in each of the projects. It should promote the realization of studies and research that are necessary. It should define projects to be built, define elements of cooperation, and monitoring programs and so forth. In other words, the Binational Core Group is the core group that needs to begin to work on the binational. And for a while, the Binational Core Group actually began to meet by virtue of the commissioners inviting what the minute calls for in terms of representation from federal, state, and local, as well as NGOs. But nothing really happened until we began to realize that what was happening was that there wasn't really a formal structure for it. So a citizen group got together and said, what you really need is a group with local regional membership to be active in water management and to actually have a proactive approach to analysis and decision making. It has to be fixed membership, subject to internal bylaws and so forth. And those are the attributes or the jurisdiction, the competencies of the Binational Core Group as I had read them off. And this is what came out. The commissioners chair the Binational Core Group, but there's also the Director del Organismo de Cuenca, Conagua, Regional Director, the Secretary of Urban Development in Baja California, the representative for the local government in Tijuana, an NGO representative, a private sector representative, and one from academia on the US side, Region 9 Director of Office of Water, Cal EPA, and then also a local representative. And here's some of the twinning that Trent was talking about. Hopefully this will probably anchor some twinning so that research and other collaboration can begin to take place. We really think that the binational core group needs to have three features. It has to have stature and prestige. It's not for friends to be sitting there, friends of the commissioner, I mean. It has to be formal and be consistent, and it has to have a lot of transparency. And in order for that to actually work, we think that there needs to be a technical secretariat to actually run data documentation, to do a lot of running around between universities, to compile an agenda, to maintain communication between the core group members, to coordinate logistics, become the official archive for the watershed, capitalize on the technical binational work groups that are already formed, and coordinate that with the binational core group agenda, and then obviously compile points of interest from the public. That diagram, which you probably cannot read, are just all 9 activities for the binational core group. The 4 that are in yellow probably pertain to off-meeting responsibilities for the secretariat. The rest will be decision-making. And there's a format that we're considering, and that would entail a private session and a public session, probably the public session being first, where the public sets the agenda, and then the binational core group meets in private and tries to air out and resolve these issues. My closing remarks, so I'm feeling a little antsy here. First of all, the Tijuana River watershed is the only U.S.-Mexico watershed that doesn't have any conflict in terms of objectives. Again, it's hard to avoid the effects without addressing the causes, and so it would really be important for the watershed to be managed as a whole. You should know that throughout the world there are about 300 plus, let's say, international rivers. At last count from Oregon State University, Aaron Wolf has 310 international rivers, and they keep growing because of more research, but also because of segmentation of countries and so forth. Out of the 310 international rivers, they comprise about 47% of the land area in continents, so it's huge. 60% of freshwater flows are in international watersheds. 157 countries have some sort of a international watershed. 52 countries have about 100% of their territory in international watersheds. As I said, U.S. is about 90, Mexico is about 10%. Transboundary management is really hard. Transboundary water management really needs a model, and so we're hoping that we can really create a model that actually allows us to best accomplish what Trent said we need to accomplish. Thank you very much.